Welcome to Onward Lebanon. This is our monthly television show hosted by myself, Isaac Severs, Lebanon City Superintendent. And today I'm joined by Mrs. Tiffany Martin, Barry Intermediate Assistant Principal, Mr. Alex Brunk, Lebanon Junior High Principal. We're going to get to you guys in a little bit, but I want to just make sure that welcome you to the show this morning. And a little bit later, we'll be joined by Dr. Cherie Gibson, our Special Services Director. What we try to do in this television show is highlight our students, our programs, and our staff. And we regularly will meet in this space to talk about the things that are going on in Lebanon City Schools. But today, I want to take the opportunity to highlight a change that's happening at Lebanon High School this year and across our district as related to cell phones. As we prepare for the 2024 school year, I want to update you on an important policy shift that happened this summer with our Board of Education approving a change in July of 2024. During the board meeting, the board approved a shift that would make sure that cell phones are not used anywhere between kindergarten and 8th grade at all during the school day, and that's been consistent the last couple of years for us. But the major shift happens at Lebanon High School, where students in grades 9 through 12 will have access to their phones before school, after school, and during lunchtime. I want to talk a little bit today about why that shift was made. We're going to talk about the experiences were happening in our buildings that led us to that decision, and then look at the impact that cell phones and social media are having on our kids. Just share some information with our community. As we learn information, we're going to hope to share these things with parents as resources for you to make educated decisions in your homes, for you to understand what we're dealing with in our school buildings, and just look at what the implications of these are in our daily lives as a society, specifically centered around Lebanon City School students. I want to take a few moments this morning and just talk a little bit about our communication plan, and talk to you a little bit about some research that I found, and get your input on, like, is that what you're seeing in yourself? So last week, Lebanon High School Principal Mr. Reynolds sent an email to all students and families. Today, I just released a letter to our community outlining a lot of the details to this plan, and we're not going to rehash those today in the television show, but I want to forward people's attention to our website, where you can read Mr. Reynolds' communication, the letter from myself, and we also just put out a frequently asked questions document today. So one of the things that I started looking at as we were deciding on this decision was, what's the research around this? A recent Common Sense Media research report was published. I know that as the resource that as parents I go to, and I think you guys have used it before also, like, is this movie safe for my kids? Is there content that's appropriate? Things like that. They followed students for several months and had access to the amount of time they spent on their phone, what they were doing on their phone. And so just a couple of things to point out here as we jump into this today, I thought was fascinating. Students, children under the age of 12, 1 in 3 have a smartphone under the age of 12. Yeah. Like, is that what you're seeing in your buildings? Like the age at which, like, what do you guys think in terms of the age in which people are starting to get cell phones, or what you're hearing in your friend groups with kids?
Yeah, I would say at the junior high, our students are coming in 7th grade already having their cell phones. It's not their first rodeo. They've been engaged with them for, it seems like, a few years.
Yeah. One of the things that was interesting about this research, they talked about the amount of time kids were spending on it. Children between the ages of 8 and 12, the research study revealed that the average amount of time spent on a cell phone was 4 hours and 40 minutes of screen time each day. I mean, that seems like a lot of time, right? Like, that's a lot. That's a lot. I mean, I think about my own cell phone use, probably consistent with that maybe. But for young kids, I mean, is that a number alarming or in line with what you think?
It's alarming. Yeah. But I could see it, especially over the summer.
Yeah. 4 hours and 40 minutes, right? I'm a former math teacher, so I was talking to my kids about this the other day. Like, if we give them 6 hours of screen time, right, that's a fourth of their day. Close to half the day they're sleeping, right? It's half of their waking time, or close to it. So these were just a couple of things that I wanted to point out before we get into some of the questions, just to give the staff members, the parents, the students some information around this. Of that research study, that 4 hours and 40 minutes a day, some of those students using it were as few as a few minutes per day, right? They're purely using it for communication with their families, texting or calling mom or dad. The largest user on average was using their cell phone 16 hours a day as a part of the research study. The other thing we talked about is the amount of times kids pick their phones up, right? Our phones are not in the room right now. They're in the other room except for you that has notes on yours. But like, right, the amount of time that I pick my phone up to look and see what's on it, they looked at that. The average was over 100 times per day. The median was 51 times, and the largest was 498 times a day that a kid in the research study grabbed their phone, picked it up, and looked at it. The other thing was the research showed 97% of all students were using their cell phone during the school day. They could track the hours, Monday through Friday, school hours. 97% of all students were using their cell phone during the school day. So one of the things we've heard in terms of feedback is like, Mr. Severs, I wasn't even using my cell phone during the day. Why are you outlawing it? Why are you taking them away? Well, the research is showing that kids are on their phones during the day. And the average for that was 43 minutes of cell phone use during the day, and ranged from 1 minute all the way up to 6.5 hours of cell phone use during the school. 6.5 hours, that's the entire time they're at school.
Sure.
Right? Whether they're either streaming movies, videos, music, whatever it was. The median number of pickups looking at a phone in terms of students in a day was 13, but that ranged anywhere from 1 to 229. I think about the constant distraction and disruption. Some of the things we're going to talk about with you in a few moments is like, what were the disruptions it was causing to the academics? What were the disruptions it was causing to the social interaction? And I think about that constantly looking at my phone. 229 times is a lot in a day. And this is where I thought was interesting. One of the feedback pieces we received from parents is, I want to be able to get a hold of my kids, during the school day. What if there's an emergency? What if I need to tell them something? What are some of those things? And so we'll talk a little bit about the nuances of the policy. When can kids check their phone in the different buildings? But the research showed in this that 30% of all cell phone use during the school day was on social media. 17% was on digital gaming, and 26% was on YouTube. Right? A very, very small percentage of their use was actually on messaging or phone calls, like less than 5% of their time. And so I think we just think about those things as the why behind this decision, right? When the research that we can find, and this is a pretty, reputable source, it really makes it easy to find for parents. But when the research that we see matches what we're experiencing in our buildings, right? I feel like we have to act as a district. We feel the distraction. We sense the behavioral issues that are coming from it. We can point to that. But when we begin to see research either on the distraction of cell phones or on the harmful effects on students' development, we as a district felt compelled to act. The other part of this is, Ohio legislature put out a model policy and a requirement for schools to have policies on cell phones by July of 2025. We decided internally, if we believe this is the right thing to do now, right? Why wait till July of 2025? We're going to act. And so I appreciate having the two of you on today, because I want to get into a little bit of your stories and what you're experiencing in the buildings, maybe as parents as well, and what you're seeing, but also your willingness to act when you see things, right? And so how do we respond to the need that we have as a school district is really important to us. So I'm going to jump into this first point that we make. We really believe that this decision is in alignment and in agreement with our district mission to build a respectful, responsible, and reflective community. And one of the things I try to do in my communication today to parents was, how does this decision align with reflective, respectful, and responsible? So I believe we have the responsibility to reduce distractions. We have the responsibility to reduce distractions. We talk about the amount of pickup time, the notifications. Students are receiving up to 4,500 notifications a day, according to this research project. They're only interacting with 1,200 of them, but the amount of times their phone tells them something's going on, the distractions. So we're seeking to remove the distractions and reinforce our responsibility to create environments conducive to learning. So Mr. Brunk, I want to talk to you real quick. We gave you some questions ahead of time so you'd be prepared, but just want to have a conversation with you. We've done this a lot of times before, but this decision actually originated and first was made last year at Lebanon Junior High with a shift. And so can you talk to us a little bit about what you were seeing at Lebanon Junior High, what led to this decision last year to remove cell phones from the academic setting?
Sure. So historically, we started allowing cell phones for research-based purposes. At that point, the apps, so there were some newer apps where students could interact with like a quizzes or something like that, what the teacher had on their computer with their cell phone. They put a code in and off they went. Since we've gone to one-to-one Chromebooks, that need has completely disappeared. And so what we started to see that cell phones were being used in the wrong way. We know that as simple as it sounds, that when students are engaged, they achieve. They were not engaged. As you talked about the pickups, the constant pickups on the phone, that was less time that they were engaged with the material, or their mind was on something else that had to be re-engaged, which again goes to now the teacher having to redirect. And so instead of instruction to the students that are paying attention, they're now redirecting the other students, and it's causing that rift in the educational process. They have to get back started to, okay, where was I once again? And then we saw things in the bathrooms and the hallways. Students were doing things to become TikTok famous, we'll say, for a lack of better words, where I'm going to go vandalize the bathroom, but I'm going to get it videotaped. And then I'm going to, at that point, post it, and then, oh, look, everybody sees you, and then you become famous in the hallways, Lebanon Junior High School or beyond. So those were the three major areas that we saw. Obviously, the bigger concern, yes, is vandalism, but the bigger concern is the academic side of things. And it was anecdotal. Our building leadership team brought this up in a conversation that we had about cell phones, and it was a great point, and we talked as a district, is it time to do this? I think for the junior high, it was a good time to do it because I think a lot of people will say, 13 and 14-year-olds probably shouldn't have cell phones anyway, even though we all do, including my own 14-year-olds. And so it's probably a little easier to say, okay, let's see how it works at the junior high. And I've seen great things. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I think one of the things I was talking about, like when I think about the word distraction or the reality of cell phones, right? Like we as adults all have experiences. We've talked about these ourselves where I'm supposed to be doing something else, yep. Right? Mm-hmm. And I get distracted. I was sharing earlier, with some folks that, like, personally for me, I recognized that Instagram was a distraction. Mm-hmm. I wasn't posting. I was following what my kids were doing or what other kids were doing, and I was using it that way. But mainly it was the scrolling, and I get sucked into reels. And I think we all have these experiences, right, where we can point to, that's not how I wanted to spend my time, right? But I ended up getting distracted and sucked in. It's very addictive in that nature. And so last year was our first year with that, right? What are some lessons as you reflect on that? What are maybe a story or two or some lessons that you point to, like, that was a success in our building last year in that implementation? Yeah,
so our teachers are 100%, they're ecstatic about what they saw in their classrooms. It's all anecdotal, but they talk about the engagement, the lack of time that they had to redirect. They're focused from bell to bell, and they don't have to worry about that cell phone. Even if it was a cell phone that was put into a pocket chart on the wall, that students had that pool of, where's my phone? Is it okay? They kept looking over there. So even simply just getting them out of the classroom, putting them in their lockers. We also understand that, like, 13 and 14-year-olds need control, right? Like, as a parent, you got to give them something, or they will rebel. And so our policy wasn't, you're done, no cell phones at all on campus. Check your cell phone in between bells. It's perfectly fine. You can do that. That's not an issue at all. You can text mom and dad. I love getting texts from my kids. That's fine, but keep it in your locker. Still no videotaping, no picture taking. That's not allowed, which was typical even before this. We do not allow them to have it at lunch. There was a variety of reasons for that. We were worried that they weren't going to remember, because they are 13 and 14-year-olds. They're not going to remember to put them back in their locker. So we just said no lunch at all, different than the high school. But we felt that was development appropriate for the junior high kids. We had a couple of instances. For example, in our first lunch, we had a student who, we were listening to music on Friday, and he decided to get up and dance. And so we just let it go. And I took a step back, and the only person with their cell phone out was me, because I was taking a picture and videotaping the environment where kids were in the moment and were enjoying and having a good time, and it was respectful. And to see that moment where they were engaged in a healthy manner was huge. And we knew at that point we did the right thing. And then we allowed students to go outside this year, like last 10, 15 minutes. If you're done with your lunch, just go outside, kind of like a pseudo recess. We don't want to call it a recess, but it is. Just let some energy out midday. And to see them interact in a healthy manner, whether that's athletically or just chit-chatting as friends should be doing, it's huge. And so you can feel the sense in the hallways. You can feel it at lunch. the difference that it's making. And it feels like when we went to school before cell phones. So it's been really good.
So I remember the day you sent me the surveillance camera picture from above, right? And it was a kid standing in the aisle dancing in the cafeteria, and your comment was, "What do you notice?" Right? And there were no cell phones. And I think about my own children. My kid was actually in the frame that day of the video, standing up, I'm laughing, playing along, whatever it was. And I think about their willingness to be kids and to be goofy and to be playful is somehow stymied by, is this going to end up on the internet?
Yeah.
Right? Am I going to be a meme? Is this going to be posted on TikTok? And so I think that byproduct of that is restoring a little bit of kids being free to be 13 and 14-year-olds and have fun. So, as we think about the high school, what are some lessons learned or challenges maybe? Did you have any pushback or challenges this year that you think are helpful for us as a district to know about?
Interestingly, the kids get it. And I think they may not agree, but they understand. And I think because we are giving some of that control back to them, and they respect that. I had a few students, it was a handful, 3 or 4, throughout the beginning of the first quarter that would say, "Mr. Brunk, can we change this to have our cell phones?" And that was at lunchtime, right? That they wanted that time to be on their phone. And we said, no, we're not going to. We're going to continue this year. We're just going to see how it plays out, give it some time. I didn't hear one complaint the rest of the year. I received 2 complaints from parents that were more aligned, and as a parent I get this, more aligned with the safety of their child. And my response was very simply, if there's an emergency at the school, I don't want them to interact with you. I need them to listen to the professionals, the teachers in the classroom, because sometimes we have a matter of seconds to make a decision. And if they're trying to text you, they're not listening. And that's going to be a bad situation. So once that was explained and parents realized that, I can still get in contact with my child, that they're safe, and that safety was a number one concern, it was fine. And it went really well. And I think I don't see us turning back anytime soon. And I appreciate the high school doing it as well. I think they're going to see very similar, kind of like, I don't like this at first. And then it's like, okay, this is not too bad.
No. So one of the things we talked about here is we want to be responsible to reduce the distractions, right? We have to help kids understand that as well, right? That these rules are really there for them and their protection and their support and their development, not as something like we're taking away, taking away something from them. So I appreciate that, Mr. Brunk. I may come back to you here in a few minutes, but I'm going to shift to the next point, which we want to foster and work on being respectful in our social interactions, right? And so how do we affirm our district's purpose to promote academic learning and the development of strong, respectful relationships? And so as we talk about this from those respectful relationships and Tiffany, the reason that I asked you to be here today is because a lot of our conversations are cell phones are not, allowed at Berry and haven't been for a while or ever, really, right? Because we think it's not developmentally appropriate there. We think it's, we're trying to protect that environment as much as possible. But as the assistant principal at Berry, you see regularly the impact that social media and cell phones have on students, even in grades where they're not allowed to have them at school. And so, how are cell phones and social media impacting student behaviors even as low as Berry and below?
Yeah. What we typically see, a couple of things. First, I think students really pay a lot of attention to social media. Maybe it's when they get home, but they're seeing, what should my hair look like? What should I be wearing? What's cool? What's not cool? And unfortunately, that's the same thing everyone else is seeing. And so we get into the position sometimes where we hear students, they all have the same Stanley or pair of shoes or whatever. And then I think it creates this divide, this social divide for students who maybe don't have those things that, maybe wouldn't be there. I mean, that's always been a thing, forever. But I don't think 10 years ago anyone cared what lunchbox I brought to school or whatever it may be. So I think there's that for sure. It's kind of making the dividing lines a little clearer. Which is unfortunate. The other piece that I see is if there's something that happens at school that's fairly minor, an embarrassing moment, or maybe a disagreement between friends, instead of everyone going home and shaking that off and, sleeping on it and giving it a break, it tends to snowball throughout the evening on social media or through texts and group messages. And then it just turns something really minor into a really big deal. And not only with those two, but they invite 25 of their closest friends to join in. So it just keeps small conflicts kind of going. It fuels the fire.
Yeah, I think we've become so accustomed to dealing with all things and all unhappiness or whatever it is by putting it on Facebook, tweeting about it, throwing it on Instagram, whatever it may be, that the ability to sit down and have those conversations and work through conflict face to face has become more challenging. I think we're seeing that even at younger grades than what we would hope to see. Is there something that you want parents of 5th and 6th grade students to know that about the impact of cell phones on their child's relationships, or something they should be aware of? We see kids, 900 of them all day long, every day, right? Yeah. What are some things we want parents to be able to maybe know and understand that we see in a school setting?
I think every parent knows their kid best. So at risk of not telling parents what to do, I would say that I feel pretty strongly that students shouldn't have their cell phones at night, like when they're going to bed. I think that is a great time to take it away. I, as an adult, have a hard time putting down, Instagram Reels sometimes too. And I am, however old I am, but, a 13 and 12 and 11-year-old, they don't have that maturity to stop and say, okay, it's time for bed. I need 7 or 8 hours of sleep to feel good tomorrow. So I think get them an alarm clock and have them turn that phone in, do regular phone checks. I think a lot of parents would be really surprised at the things their kids are seeing and hearing and saying on social media. And maybe just, if I could add one more thing, add some time limits to those things if you do allow your students or your kids to have social media. I would say no social media is best at that age, but if they have them, maybe some limits. So
one of the things that I hear from parents that will call and say, like, we don't allow our kids to have cell phones. We don't allow our kids to have social media. They're not accessing the internet. How did they learn these things, right? Other kids around them are, right? Other kids around them as early as 1 and 3, 12-year-olds. I think that probably is even higher, and so just the conversation with their kids about what they are hearing from other kids, what they maybe see on somebody else's phone, I think is really important. And then the last thing, this is a little bit more personal to you. You have a student who's an 8th grader. You have a student who's a junior. One of them has never been able to have their phone at school, and one of them will now be giving a phone up during the academic day. We're in this together, right? I'm in this with you as a parent as well. What are some feelings around this as a parent, and then as from your kid's perspective on how the adjustment may be happening?
So my youngest, who has been on the tail end of no phones, he's never been allowed to have one at school. He's like, oh, of course, they're taking him again, and, really frustrated. But to the same comment, he doesn't have as many rights or privileges on his phone as maybe his older brother does. So, he doesn't necessarily have as many things to do on there anyway. And he's getting way more used to that. And so it's nice to see that he doesn't care quite as much as maybe the older one will after having that experience with the phone. But I think they both know, like Alex said, they know that it's better. All the students know that I'm going to learn more. I'm going to be more involved. I'm going to be more, social with people. But it'll definitely be tougher, I think, for the high school students who have had that for a long time. Yeah. So
I think we've all shared in our personal life or with our children, when they've gone periods of time without cell phones, they couldn't fathom it ahead of time. And on the tail end of it, the reality was they were much more present with us as parents, engaged with the people around us. And I think my hope for our kids is that that's the experience they have as well. Right? It's just going to be difficult and challenging up front. I want to thank the two of you for your leadership. Thanks for being here today. I'm excited because I want to announce now, we're going to come back here in a few moments after we get done with this episode. And I'd like to talk to you guys a little bit more personal about parenting in the digital age. So as a district this year, we're working to communicate in multiple platforms in multiple ways, the same information, and recognizing that a lot of our people are getting their things through podcasts now. So today's episode will be turned into a podcast. And then also just sit down and let's talk about how we parent our kids through cell phones, social media, maybe as a resource. And so while I'm excited to talk to you and your leadership in our buildings, I also learn things from the two of you as parents as well. And so I'm excited to talk about that. So we're going to come back after a break. And when we return, we'll have Dr. Cherie Gibson, our 7 through 12 Director of Special Services, with us today.
Our first item of business is a presentation, which is a swearing in of a new officer.
A Freestone Mayor with Mr. and Mrs. Santa Claus.
Merry Christmas.
Brings it himself inside the tent. Touchdown, Marymount.
From the top of the key, Anna Habra ties the score.
Welcome back from our commercial break. I'm happy to be joined now by Dr. Cherie Gibson. Dr. Gibson is our 7 through 12 Student Services Director, new department title there of Student Services, but she's trained as a school psychologist, and so a lot of background in child development. And so I just want to take a few moments today to talk to you about maybe some of the academic impact or mental health or society, kind of the other stuff besides, what's happening in our school buildings. As the director, you're the head of our mental health department and counselors as well. And so you see this sort of, the impact it's having on kids from that perspective. And so just take a few moments today to talk to you about that. And so I know last week you attended a workshop by MindPeace. MindPeace is one of our partners, along with Cincinnati Children's Hospital, dealing with mental health for our students. And so we've been discussing the connection and the research a little bit here, but what are some takeaways that you have from maybe that experience last week of the MindPeace workshop, or other things that you're hearing in terms of the impact of cell phones and social media on students?
Yeah, I think in general, MindPeace and Children's Hospital have been our partners for over 7 years. So providing mental health services in our district. And Dr. Sorter, who's the clinical director of child and adolescent psychiatry, was the keynote at that particular event. And he talked about, in general, the increased rate and trends of youth mental health. We're seeing an increase in anxiety. We're seeing an increase in behavioral disorders and depression. And we're starting to see the impact it has on school services. And so he discussed not only those rates being increased, but they increased exponentially during the adolescent years. Mm-hmm. And so he talked a little bit about the adolescent brain and how the human development of the brain is underdeveloped at this adolescent age. Yeah. And the prefrontal cortex is where the planning and memory, it's where organization, time management, and all the things that students need to engage in school, where all of that happens. But when the frontal lobe is underdeveloped, students tend to engage in more immature or risky behavior. They turn to their devices. They use unhealthy coping mechanisms. And that all impacts school because it's a complete distraction. Yeah. I guess where cell phones kind of interact with this is that, access to social media creates the biggest distraction as it relates to school. Yeah. And those distractions, again, impact their ability to learn, listen to lectures. It impacts in sleep quality and increases the risk of mental health challenges throughout their adolescent years.
So one of the things I've seen as I've researched some of this is like there's actually stunting the development of that prefrontal cortex. The more time they spend, it's having adverse effects on their development. The cell phone use, the screen time, all of those things is really causing some delays in that. I think it's a push. One of the reasons we've talked a little bit about this is there's this push to wait until eighth grade. That 14-year-old is when they really start to maybe have some solidification of that brain development, or it's getting closer to being fully developed at that point in time, 14 through 18. And so, you and I have talked about it. A lot of these people that developed devices and the internet, devices, cell phones, they're holding off on cell phones for their own children for this reason. Correct. One of the things we talked about that earlier, I don't know if you had anything to add in terms of just that delay and what could be achieved by pushing that off a little bit later.
Yeah, I think again, just keeping in mind that underdeveloped frontal lobe, or that prefrontal cortex is what we're talking about here. And so Wait to Eighth, which I heard Alex and you mentioned, is a great organization with a campaign that's emphasizing or encouraging parents to wait to introduce cell phone use to students. So, and then gradually bring in aspects of social media, because there are basic, components and applications of a cell phone. Gradually introduce, texting, use of phone for emergency purposes. But then when it gets into social media, there needs to be some boundaries set by parents on uses of social media, the things that kids are exposed to, and definitely supervision and monitoring of the different websites and things that students can get on, to just monitor that exposure and that information. Because again, students do not have all of the problem solving and decision making tools that they need with the poor quality of their underdeveloped prefrontal lobe. And so it's a responsibility of parents and educators to help students kind of problem solve through that use of social media.
One of the things we've talked about, I mean, your role, specifically aligns to special education in grades 7 through 12, kind of the largest component of your role. You have a background in school psychology, so you're understanding how those student identifications or diagnoses impact their educational, process and their ability to learn. What are some of the things that you think in terms of the distraction, right? What are the impacts it has on all students, but are there specifically, more significant impacts on students that maybe have issues with some of their executive functioning or other things like that? Is there something for parents to be aware of in terms of that as well?
I mean, in general, multitasking impacts just general attention for students. So for students that may be experiencing difficulty with ADHD or poor impulse control, or even learning disabilities as it relates to their reading and performance in classroom, multitasking really impacts their cognitive ability to engage in the task at hand. And so when you introduce cell phones in that, and students are texting in the middle of the day or during lessons, again, that split attention impairs their ability to remember or retain the information that teachers are sharing with them. It impacts their ability to engage fully into the classroom discussions. And then also the social aspect of the classroom, being able to, engage with students and have conversation about projects and things like that. While we all think that we're great at multitasking,
I think I'm pretty good at it, but I'm not great. I know
most of us are not very successful because of that division of attention. And then that impacts, that creates gaps in learning. That impacts, students' ability to control impulses. And that's where we see the increases in behavioral activity or behavior problems at school. That's when we see students fall behind, and it's starting to impact their academic performance because of that impairment of that executive functioning and inability to listen and engage and retain the information that they're being taught.
So one of the things that we've been working on behind the scenes and in talk with Dr. Sorter and others with MindPeace is a parent forum, right? Bringing experts from outside the district into our district to provide resources to parents, to talk to them about maybe the mental health implications or the way that how do we address the mental health crises in our community amongst our students. And so would you share a little bit about sort of the thought process behind this mental health forum that we're going to have for parents? And will we be talking anything about cell phones or social media during that time as well?
So we've created a parent forum that's titled Building Community, a forum for youth mental health in the digital era. And the reason we're specifically tying mental health to the digital era is because, again, so much access to negative and, just maladaptive behaviors and information on on social media and through use of smartphones in particular, not just cell phones, but smartphones specifically. And so we are bringing in all of the partners that we just discussed. We're bringing in Cincinnati Children's Hospital, panelists from 1 in 5, and then also through Mindpiece to share information about the trends of student mental health, and then also just bring that awareness to the type of things that impact learning, anxiety, and how parents can use strategies to help mitigate that, through their home. One of the things as we tie in the topic of cell phone usage is just reiterating setting boundaries, limiting screen time, ensuring that students get a good, night of sleep, so that they can be fully engaged and refreshed in the morning and not up all night checking their phones trying to see what's going on TikTok or, what's going on social media. And so the goal of the forum is, again, just to provide information to parents and to give them resources so that they can better monitor students as it relates to their mental health.
So we want to take some time today just to think about this from the impact on child development, the impact on social emotional well-being, because we sense this, we feel this, we see the research. You and I, neither one of us are experts when it comes to the research here. All we can share today was what we've been reading, what we've been experiencing. And so one of the things that the third point in terms of this plan and tying it into our mission is we want to be reflective on the culture that we're creating and the self-awareness for our students, right? So are there practices that they're engaging in, right? Whether it's checking their phone on a regular basis, the ability to multitask or not to multitask. They think they can, right? I just need to listen to music because it helps me think better. Is a thing I hear in my house a lot, right? Or in schools. And so I need music playing in the background because it helps me process what's going on, right? Is that really a distraction? So being reflective about the decisions that we're making as a district, being reflective in terms of the impact that this has on us. And so I'm really excited about us as a district trying to shift from a situation where we're just sharing the good things that are happening in our district on a regular basis to how can we help partner with parents?
Yes.
Right? How do we come alongside them and say, like, I'm not an expert, I don't have it all figured out, right? But I do have these people that are regularly sharing this information with us that are the experts in the field. And we want to pass that along to parents when we can. So I really appreciate you stopping in as somebody that better than me understands the child and adolescent development and brain and helps to see the impact and the connection between these things. So if you're a parent and you're watching this or a community member and you're watching this episode, you're probably thinking, what now? What am I going to do with this information? Why is this important to us? And so what we want to do is become just a resource for parents. As we start this conversation, we really want it to be a conversation, a partnership between parents in the district to say, we don't have it all figured out. We're going to share some resources on maybe some things that we do as families ourselves, right? Or some district suggestions that we may have for you. But how can we partner and come alongside of you to help raise your kids, to help make sure that they're making good decisions, and to help make sure that they're developing? Academically is our chief priority, but more importantly, we understand that if kids are not safe, if they're not well, they have the inability to learn at the level we want them to learn. And so throughout this school year, we're continuing to discuss and share resources along the way. I hope that you'll partner with us. As we start school within the next week, we're asking families to really look at how can this be partnership between the district and home. How do you support this district at your house, this district initiative at your home, the conversations that you're having with your kids, and the development that we have as this partnership along the way. And so I want to share with you just a couple things in closing. Be looking for a podcast specifically geared towards parenting in the digital age that we're going to be putting out, just talking about what we're doing ourselves. The September 24th is the parent forum we'll be hosting at the DPC at 5:30. We'll be sharing some information with you about that as we go. And the other thing has just been asked in the last week is, what can I do to have this conversation with my kid at my house or prepare them for the changes that are happening? In the same way we ask you to make sure your kids get a breakfast every morning, get night sleep. We're transitioning back to school. If your house is anything like mine, they've been staying up late and still sleeping in late in the morning. And 7 a.m. school start time is going to be a rude awakening for junior high students. So in the same way we work to transition back to going to bed on time, getting up on time, eating breakfast. Maybe start to have some breaks in terms of cell phones at your home, right? Set it aside for 3 hours and then talk to your kids about what it felt like. How many times did you want to go get your cell phone, right? Talk about the dependency, reflect on that in terms of that conversation, begin to establish some breaks in there. If you want more resources, I'd encourage you to go to A Wired Family. It's a website. We've shared the information on our website for that, or to check out some resources at Common Sense Media. I want to thank you for our administrators today for joining us. Dr. Gibson, thanks for being here. Mr. Brunk, Mrs. Martin, thanks for showing up today and talking about our experiences. I'm looking forward to this school year. Thank you very much for joining us in the August version of Onward Lebanon.